At 27, Emma Carter took pride in her work as a member of Fever's dynamic event planning team, making sure that every aspect of their encounters fulfilled the company's exacting requirements. Emma had a talent for remaining upbeat despite the long and frequently unexpected days spent organizing suppliers, resolving last-minute problems, and keeping things on schedule. She smiled as she started her shift under pressure. Her infectious enthusiasm lifted her teammates' spirits, and they valued her painstaking attention to detail and capacity to address issues before they got out of hand. Emma flourished in the company culture, which fostered innovation and agility, and she was more than just an event planner. She was making memories and making sure that every single experience provided attendees joy and a sense of connection. Fever wasn't for everyone. For some, the fast-paced atmosphere and high standards proved to be too much, but Emma rose to the occasion and loved how Fever rewarded diligence and promoted creativity. Even on the most trying days, Emma always seemed to be ready with support or a creative solution, as her teammates would frequently joke. However, beneath her cheerful exterior, Emma was keeping a secret that she fiercely guarded. She was homeless. Things hadn't always been this way. Just 2 months prior, Emma had lived in a small apartment with a roommate. When her roommate suddenly decided to move out, Emma was left to fend for herself. Despite taking on extra work and reducing all unnecessary expenses, she was unable to make ends meet. So by the time her lease expired, she had no choice but to leave. Emma came up with a plan, packing her belongings into the back of her old Honda Civic, signing up for a gym membership, and resolving to save every cent of her paycheck. It wasn't ideal, but she assured them it was only temporary. She reminded herself daily of her objective to save enough money for a new apartment because living out of her car required careful preparation. Emma parked in a quiet area of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot every morning, took her cleanly folded work clothes out of the trunk, and went to the adjacent gym to take a shower and freshen up. She always put on lipstick and combed her hair to make sure no one at work thought anything was by the time she got to work. She looked like a self-assured young professional during lunch breaks as her coworkers discussed weekend plans or home remodeling projects. Emma contributed thoughtfully crafted half-truths. If someone inquired about her living status, she would respond that she was looking for a place closer to her place of employment or that she was in between places. This wasn't precisely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. Her evenings had a calm routine. After work, she would get a salad or a sandwich and go to the library, where she would look through books or use the free Wi-Fi to look into reasonably priced housing alternatives. She went back to her Walmart parking space when the library closed, got into the back seat, and attempted to catch some sleep. Some nights, the cold or the sound of passing cars prevented some people from falling asleep. Her thoughts about the future kept her awake. How long would it take to save enough? What would her life look like once she had a place to call home again? Despite everything, Emma refused to let those questions overwhelm her. She focused on how far she'd come and how determined she was to rebuild her life. No one at Fever suspected a thing. Emma made sure of it. Emma had one unbreakable rule. She would never fall asleep in her car near the Fever office. It was her golden rule, the line she couldn't cross. But one exhausting evening, after an especially grueling day of back-to-back event planning meetings and last-minute changes, she broke her rule. She had driven to her usual Walmart parking lot but felt too drained to make it out of the Fever lot that night. Just a minute to stretch out my back, she thought. She reclined her seat, intending only to close her eyes briefly. When she woke up, sunlight was already streaming through the windows. Panic surged through her. As she bolted upright, the Fever lot was still mostly empty, but the thought of being seen overwhelmed her. She hastily grabbed her things and sped to the gym, determined to erase any evidence of her misstep. Little did she know someone had noticed. Caitlin Clark, a basketball superstar known for her leadership and dedication, wasn't supposed to be in the office that early. She frequently worked with Fever to promote memorable and distinctive events, and she stopped by before her morning meetings to review schedules and make some important decisions. When Caitlin arrived at the parking lot, she saw a strange car parked strangely inside. The young woman was sound asleep, and at first, she didn't think much of it. Possibly someone had stayed up late and chosen to take a nap before the morning rush. But as she made her way to the building, something about the scene stuck in her head. The woman had appeared vaguely familiar, but Caitlin couldn't immediately. Emma's morning proceeded as usual. and by the time she got to work, she had her polished appearance and cheerful demeanor fully in place. She handled calls and organized the details of the event with her usual energy, and she breathed a sigh of relief. That evening, after work, Emma stopped at Walmart to pick up a few necessities. She always kept her expenses to a minimum, but she decided to treat herself to a small snack with a few coins she had left as she stood at the checkout fumbling with loose change. Some coins slipped from her hands and fell to the floor, embarrassed Emma Ned to pick them up, carefully collecting every penny. Emma froze, her stomach dropped, and she looked up to see Caitlin Clark standing a few feet away holding a small basket of items. Miss Clark. Emma stumbled to her feet, holding the coins tightly, and she was very conscious of the fever lanyard that was still around her neck, identifying her as an employee. "I didn't think you were here." With a sweet smile, Caitlin crouched next to her and said, "Here, let me assist you," taking a few spare dollars and giving them to Emma, who said, "Oh no, you don't have to do that," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. "It's no trouble." "Everyone needs a little help sometimes," Caitlin said in a kind tone. Emma occasionally laughed nervously as she brushed her hair back and muttered, "Thank you," hurriedly trying to lighten the mood while I grabbed a few items to take home. Caitlin carefully examined her. Emma's typically self-assured demeanor appeared muted. Her clothing was a little rumpled, and her hair wasn't as well done as usual. "Are you sure everything's okay?" Caitlin said softly. Emma's smile wavered, but she nodded and said, "Just a long day," with a note of weariness in her voice. While Emma paid for her purchases and raced out of the store, Caitlin's curiosity persisted. Emma was sitting next to the car from that morning, her head in her hands, and Caitlin spotted something she hadn't noticed before. The car parked at the far corner of the lot. Caitlin walked up quietly, so as not to wake Emma. She said softly. Emma hurriedly stood, wiping at her eyes as her head flew up and her face flushed with humiliation. Miss Clark. Her speech drifted off as she looked toward her car, obviously considering whether to explain or retreat, but I was unaware of it. "You don't have to explain anything if you don't want to, but if something's going on, maybe I can help," Caitlin murmured quietly as she offered a hand to comfort her that everything was all right. Emma paused, looking for any sign of condemnation in Caitlin's expression, but she couldn't find it. The weight of her secret, which she had held for so long, suddenly seemed intolerable before she could stop herself from telling the truth. She said, "I'm homeless," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. Caitlin remained silent and allowed Emma to continue, saying, "I'm saving up." Emma quickly stated, "I just need enough for a deposit on an apartment. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't mean for you to find out," as if she needed to defend herself. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, blinking back tears. "I don't have parents. They passed away when I was a teenager. It's just me," she said, her words hanging in the air, raw and vulnerable. Emma crossed her arms, seemingly preparing to have her secret revealed. Caitlin nodded slowly, her face softening as she murmured in a whisper, "You've been managing so much on your own that it takes strength, not weakness. It's not humiliating to ask for help." Emma chuckled a little shakily. "It doesn't feel that way." Caitlin moved in closer, speaking in a steady, composed tone. "I know, Emma, and you're stronger than most people. For the record, this is our little secret, so it stays between us." Emma's breath caught, and she laughed softly for the first time that day. It was shaky, but it was real. She nodded, and Caitlin smiled warmly at her. "Emma, look after yourself. You're doing better than you think." Emma sat down as Caitlin walked back to her car, her heart pounding. Sharing her predicament was so vulnerable, but Caitlin's generosity gave her a sense of relief she hadn't had in a long time. I hope that the following day, Emma's shift at Fever began like any other, and she immersed herself in her work, making sure every aspect of the events that were about to happen was flawless. When her phone buzzed at around noon, it was Caitlin's office requesting that she come upstairs. Emma's heart froze, sinking. She smoothed her blouse and headed to the executive floor, her mind racing as she imagined the worst, that Caitlin had changed her mind and was going to fire her. When Emma arrived at Caitlin's office, Caitlin greeted her with the same kind smile from the previous evening, saying, "Thanks for coming, Emma," and motioned for her to sit down. Emma was sitting nervously on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she said, gesturing for Emma to sit. Caitlin started to lean forward a little. "First of all, I want to stress that you shouldn't feel guilty about what you've accomplished. Your hard work, savings, and optimism are amazing, but it's not appropriate for someone as gifted and committed as you to be in that predicament. This is for you," Caitlin began, sliding an envelope over the desk. "It's enough to cover an apartment for the next year, and I want you to have a safe place to call home." Emma blinked, unsure of where this was headed, and her heart was racing as Caitlin went on. Emma's lips dropped as she opened it to reply, but Caitlin raised a hand instead. "I firmly suggest that Caitlin say," Emma gazed at the teary envelope. With tears in her eyes, she muttered, "Thank you, but it didn't feel like enough." Caitlin grinned. "Just keep being the brilliant, hardworking person you are. That's enough gratitude." Emma took the envelope with her as she exited the office. Her head spinning, she finally felt the weight she had been carrying for months lift for the first time in what seemed like forever when she arrived at the parking lot after work. Emma smiled broadly and told herself it's finally over, allowing herself to think that everything would be all right.